All we say to America is to be true to what you said on paper. And we have come here to dramatize a shameful condition.
Cain, where is your brother, is a familiar phrase from an Old Testament story, and a theme that gave rise to a popular line in the Mario Van Peebles Jr. film New Jack City, an action thriller about drug dealing in New York City, featuring the comic actor Chris Rock, the crackhead who had been tempted by his addictions when he had been sent undercover to work in a crack house. And, as reported by columnist Peter Baker, in the prestigious New York Times, on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, the president assured an audience at Ebenezer Baptist Church that its side in the struggle would, indeed, overcome someday. Baker wrote, when he came to the capital of the South to honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. last year, President Biden delivered a call to nonviolent arms for voting rights, equating opponents to segregationists and vowing to rewrite Senate rules to defeat them. I will not yield, he declared. I will not flinch. Yet, 3 years after his historic election, boasting more black votes than Barack Obama, President Mr. Biden returned to Atlanta for the observance of the birthday of the slain civil rights leader Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr., by all accounts, with little to show for it. Baker wrote in the New York Times that he may not have flinched, but he did not succeed, either. None of the sweeping voting rights measures he championed passed the Democratic-controlled Congress last year, and the prospects of any passing a newly elected Republican-controlled House seem vanishingly small. Yet, to a still appreciative crowd, which included Dr. King's sister, Christine King Ferris, and one of his allies, Andrew Young, and gathered at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Reverend King had served as a co-pastor with his father, the president had preached, to the sounds of amens, hallelujahs and hosannas. At this inflection point, we know there's a lot of work that has to continue on economic justice, civil rights, voting rights and protecting our democracy, and I'm remembering that our job is to redeem the soul of America. But one topic that was not mentioned was the devastating death toll to what had been described as an invisible enemy that had, by the first anniversary of the pandemic declaration, claimed over 73,000 African Americans, where color was known. By March 7, 2021, researchers at Boston University and the Atlantic had determined that nationwide, black people have died at 1.4 times the rate of white people. And, less than a week later, the president, placing the nation on a war footing, had acknowledged that over 527,000 Americans had died, amounting to more lives lost than in both world wars, the conflict in Southeast Asia, and the terror attacks on 9/11 combined. But he had also stated that if his American Rescue Plan had failed, at any point, he would immediately acknowledge that fact. Within just 2 months after the Pfizer and Moderna mRNA products had been released on an emergency use authorization, about 10% of the population had already been administered at least one shot, with doses being administered at a rate of 1.8 million per day, including among the early pioneers some celebrities, like Lieutenant General Jody Daniels, the first female commander of the U.S. Army Reserve, providing an image of confidence that the nation could fall behind. And yet, at just that early point of the vaccine's rollout, especially with the support of Dr. Anthony Fauci, who had even participated in a Zoom call conference with members of the black clergy, sponsored by the state's COVID-19 partner Virginia Commonwealth University on January 11, 2021, black Americans were beginning to warm to the prospect of vaccination, assuming they are safe and available for free. According to Dr. Lamar Hasbrook, in an article published in the Griot, by that time, some 62% of blacks were favorable to vaccination compared to a dismal 50% 3 months earlier. However, they remained among the most vaccine-hesitant groups, behind Republicans and rural residents, with 35% saying they will probably not or definitely not get it. Last October, Dr. Louis Sullivan, the former president and founder of the Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta, and the former Health and Human Services Secretary under President George Herbert Walker Bush, had written for fellow summer visitors to Martha's Vineyard, of one black Protestant faith leader, Reverend Calvin Oak Butts, III. At the time of his death, Mr. Butts was the co-chair of a national group of black ministers working to increase COVID vaccination rates among the nation's African American community. Immediately after the approval of the Pfizer product in December 2020, Choose Healthy Life Black Clergy Action Plan, a group of the nation's leading black clergy led by Reverend Al Sharpton and Reverend Calvin Oak Butts, III, including council members like Reverend David Jefferson from Metropolitan Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, Reverend Jacques DeGraaf from the Canaan Baptist Church of Christ in New York, Reverend Horace Sheffield from the New Destiny Christian Fellowship in Detroit, Michigan, Reverend Frank Tucker from the First Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and Reverend Raphael Warnock, senior pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, Atlanta, Georgia, and recently re-elected U.S. Senator, had convened a meeting with Dr. Anthony Fauci, Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and other top doctors including the National Medical Association to address racial health disparities, fighting COVID-19 in the black community and the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. The meeting included Dr. Nancy Messonnier, Director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases at the CDC, and former CDC Director Dr. Tom Frieden, President of Resolve to Save Lives, an initiative of Vital Strategies, and as early as December 2020, with the Pfizer product only just released on an emergency use authorization, originally intended to develop a countermeasure to address what had been described as a significant threat to citizens residing abroad and uniformed members of the active duty military. Nonetheless, the nation's top doctors, joined with Reverend Butts and Sharpton, along with Deborah Fraser House, founder of the Choose Healthy Life Black Clergy Action Plan, Sheena Wright, President and CEO of United Way of New York City, Ruth Clements, Vice President and General Manager of Infectious Diseases and Immunology and leader for Quest for Health Equity at Quest Diagnostics, and had stressed the importance of communicating that the vaccines are safe, effective and necessary to beat this pandemic. Yet a recent peer-reviewed study published in Nature by Sean D. McCabe has suggested that, despite the All-Star Gala launch of the American Rescue Program, Black and Hispanic/Latinx users reported lower rates of vaccination than white, non-Hispanic users. And, even the Pew Research Center has acknowledged that, while religious institutions have helped shape many Americans' experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, from providing virtual spaces for community and worship to offering a range of opinions about the importance of wearing masks and getting vaccinated, in particular, Black Protestant denomination churches and their pastors, who often play prominent roles in Black civic life, have received a lot of attention for holding vaccination clinics and urging members to get a coronavirus shot. And so, not surprisingly, these pastors have recorded success in leading their flocks of parishioners, and as a result, members of the historically Black Protestant tradition who regularly attend church are more likely to be vaccinated than those who do not attend regularly. In fact, according to the Pew Research Center, roughly 8 in 10 members, 82%, of the historically Black Protestant tradition who attend church once a month or more have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, compared with 60% of those from the same religious tradition who attend church less often, according to the analysis, based on a survey conducted August 23 to 29, 2021. A later poll, fielded September 20 to 26, shed some light on possible explanations for this large gap. Nearly two-thirds of regular churchgoers in the historically Black Protestant tradition, 64%, say that their pastors have encouraged people to get a COVID-19 vaccine. However, even before the president, en route to join Al Sharpton's National Action Network in Washington, had preached to members and guests at America's Freedom Church, where today an eternal flame glows, marking the grave of Reverend King, an inspiring sermon, saying, "It's still the task of our time to make that dream a reality, because it's not there yet, and to make Dr. King's vision tangible, to match the words of the preachers and the poets with our deeds, for as the Bible teaches us, we must be doers of the word." It had been discovered by one former member of Black Church that the success of Black Protestant denomination clergy had relied solely upon a vaccines-only policy, mandating proof of vaccination status to attend in-person worship, and had filed suit in the federal district court in the nation's capital against several large, historically Black Protestant denomination churches from Harlem to Atlanta, including Senator Warnock's Ebenezer Baptist Church and the historic Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia, in addition to the church where the late Reverend Calvin O. Butts III had pastored, the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances or FACE Act, provisions that had been established to protect the entrances to places of worship with the same legal force that is used to protect the entrances to abortion facilities, a practice that these large Black churches support. But since January, just as silent as the president had been regarding great disappointments found with the Johnson & Johnson product that these clergymen had promoted, and mandated their faithful members to be administered, these clergy have not only elected a right to remain silent in their pulpit, but also have managed to maintain extreme social distancing from this litigation where they may get caught, and levied with fines and penalties, and, as Reverend Howard-John Wesley, pastor of the Alfred Street Baptist Church often says, that would not glorify God. As the New York Times had acknowledged when the president dared to preach as a layman in Reverend King's pulpit, the president arguably owes his presidency to the critical mass of Black voters, and yet, according to the CDC, on March 2, 2021, non-Hispanic Black, Hispanic/Latino, Hispanic, and American Indian/American Native persons have experienced higher rates of disease, hospitalization and death compared with non-Hispanic white persons. President Biden's officials at the CDC have officially taken the position this is likely related to inequities in social determinants of health that put racial and ethnic minority groups at increased risk for COVID-19, including overrepresentation among essential workers who have higher risk of exposure to COVID-19, lower incomes, reduced access to health care, or higher rates of comorbid conditions. However, there may be some news to give pause amongst members of Black Protestant churches who had placed faith in the assurances of their clergy who had zealously promoted the one-shot regimen adenovirus product developed by Johnson & Johnson. According to official reports, on May 22, 2023, Janssen Biotech Incorporated requested the voluntary withdrawal of the Emergency Use Authorization (EUA) of the Janssen COVID-19 vaccine. Janssen Biotech Incorporated informed the FDA that the last lots of the vaccine purchased by the U.S. government have expired. There is no demand for new lots of the vaccine in the U.S., and they do not intend to update the strain composition of this vaccine to address emerging variants. On June 1, 2023, FDA revoked the EUA for this vaccine. A peer-reviewed study by Joseph Fromon, first published online in August 2022, had examined the more popular mRNA products being marketed by pharmaceutical giants Pfizer and Moderna, which had recently announced, in response to declining demand, a fourfold increase in price per dose, fitting well with the picture of a declining threat posed by COVID-19. And that study had examined particularly what appeared to be the clear majority of serious adverse events, or SAEs, associated with those COVID-19 countermeasures, such as ischemic stroke, acute coronary syndrome, and brain hemorrhage. Generally, an SAE was defined as an adverse event that results in any of the following conditions: death, life-threatening at the time of the event, inpatient hospitalization or prolongation of existing hospitalization, persistent or significant disability/incapacity, a congenital anomaly/birth defect, medically important event, based on medical judgment. And reporting on only the Pfizer and Moderna products, this damning peer-reviewed study had determined that, combined, there was a 16% higher risk of serious adverse events in mRNA vaccine recipients, as high as 36% for the most popular product, the Pfizer vaccine, but none of these products have yet been removed from the market, despite an injunction filed in federal court in November by Major Mike Webb against Pfizer, Moderna, the FDA, the CDC and the NIAID, a matter that the court moved quickly to quash, along with another action filed in December against the Department of Defense to obtain a response to a request submitted under the Freedom of Information Act to determine the number of excess fatalities incurred among uniformed members of the military, litigations about which government officials have elected a right to remain silent, and not even reported in any press. And yet, especially for the pastor of the Alfred Street Baptist Church, Reverend Howard-John Wesley, a former Magna Cum Laude graduate of Duke University who had majored in biomedical engineering, before he had mandated his membership to be vaccinated, he had to have known that the CDC, by September 2021 had reported that among U.S. adults without immunocompromising conditions, vaccine effectiveness against COVID-19 hospitalization during March 11 to August 15, 2021, was higher for the Moderna vaccine, 93%, than the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, 88%, and the Janssen vaccine, 71%. Why would a pastor and religious leader promote the least efficacious product for his membership during a lethal pandemic in which more people have died than in the Holocaust and in half the time? Certainly, at least Pastor Wesley had to have been aware that by May 6, 2022, even CNN reporter Catherine Dillinger had reported that, although President Biden's CDC experts had still believed that the benefits of the J&J vaccine outweigh the risks for certain people, they had put strict limits on the use of the product that has never been approved by the FDA, limiting the emergency use authorization of the Johnson & Johnson/Janssen COVID-19 vaccine to people 18 and older for whom other vaccines aren't appropriate or accessible, and those who opt for J&J because they wouldn't otherwise get vaccinated. And yet black pastors, like Senator Warnock, required their members to get vaccinated or worship at home. In April 2021, even the American Heart Association, for which Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin has now become lead spokesman, had reported that the CDC had imposed a temporary pause on the Janssen product because of reports of a serious condition called cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, CVST, which refers to blood clots in the brain's veins, not in the arteries, as is the case for most strokes, in combination with thrombocytopenia, low blood platelet count. CVST and thrombocytopenia together is called thrombosis thrombocytopenia syndrome, TTS. When TTS is linked to receiving a COVID-19 vaccine, it is called vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia, VITT. But did Reverend Wesley or Reverend Warnock tell their congregations about this risk to their health, or just leave them to the Lord in prayer? According to the American Heart Association, in April 2021, if associated with the COVID-19 vaccine, cases of TTS/VITT occurred several days up to 2.5 weeks after being vaccinated with the Johnson & Johnson/Janssen COVID-19 vaccine in the US, or up to 3.5 weeks after receiving the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine in Europe. And the church, at least the black church, suddenly got a mighty silent, and we didn't hear no amens. Early concerns about the Janssen product had appeared almost from the beginning, just as it had been widely known even in the press that that product was inferior in ratings for efficacy, but, nonetheless, the pastors of black Protestant denomination pastors threw caution to the wind, placing the lives of their members at risk, not only remaining silent on that issue of social justice, but also mandating the use of these products, now removed from the market, to their membership, if they wished to attend worship in person for an hour of power, to get their praise on, or to worship in the presence of the Lord. And now, in litigation before the federal judiciary, these faith leaders are claiming, like Cain, that they are not their brother's keeper, weighed by the scales and found wanting. During a pandemic, black clergy required an A-team solution, and we are now standing like Mr. T, pitying the fool.
And now that it's finally over, with a chance for the whole human race, fighting breaks out across the table as they're busily saving their face. Yes, they all start talking as the men start moving, and they all start fighting.
And we have come here to dramatize a shameful condition.
This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest.